Welcome back to the channel everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today, because what we are about to explore together is one of the most astonishing and conversation-starting stories in modern coin collecting, a story that has captured the imagination of numismatists, casual collectors, treasure hunters, and everyday people who suddenly look twice at the change in their pockets. And today we are diving deep into the legend, mystery, controversy, and incredible possibilities surrounding the 1999 1-cent coin that is rumored, discussed, debated, and sometimes even whispered about as being worth up to $17 million, yes, $17 million for a coin that most people would overlook without a second thought. And as we begin this journey, it is important to understand that the value of rare coins is not born from face value or age alone, but from a powerful combination of errors, mistakes, anomalies, minting accidents, survival rates, collector demand, historical context, and the human fascination with the unusual. And the 1999 1-cent sits at the crossroads of all of these forces, making it one of the most talked about modern pennies in existence. So let's settle in and explore how a simple copper-plated zinc cent from the late 20th century could possibly rise into the realm of multi-million-dollar collectibles, starting with the era itself. Because 1999 was a year of transition for the United States Mint, a time when production pressures were high, technology was evolving, and quality control systems, while advanced compared to earlier decades, were still vulnerable to rare but dramatic failures. And it is precisely within these failures that legends are born. The Lincoln cent had already undergone significant changes by this time, including the shift from solid copper to copper-plated zinc earlier in the 1980s. And by 1999, billions of pennies were being struck annually across multiple mint facilities, primarily Philadelphia and Denver, with San Francisco producing proof issues. And when production numbers reach into the billions, the margin for error may be small, but the absolute number of errors that slip through can still be astonishing. And among those errors are the seeds of extraordinary value. One of the most talked about possibilities surrounding the 1999 1-cent is the existence of extreme off-metal strikes, coins that were struck on planchets never intended for pennies at all, including experimental alloys, foreign blanks, or even leftover planchets from other denominations. And when a penny is struck on the wrong metal, its weight, color, magnetic properties, and sound immediately set it apart. And collectors place immense value on confirmed off-metal errors, especially when they come from modern years where minting controls were expected to prevent such mistakes. Because rarity combined with modern improbability creates a powerful narrative, and the more unbelievable the error, the more desirable it becomes. Another major category of errors that fuels the multimillion-dollar valuation claims is the possibility of a dramatic double die obverse or reverse, not the minor doubling that is often mistaken for wear or machine doubling, but a true hub doubling where the design itself was impressed twice at different angles during the die creation process, resulting in bold, clearly separated doubling on the date, the word liberty, the motto "In God We Trust," or the memorial details on the reverse. And if such a double die were to exist in extremely limited numbers, especially if it went largely unnoticed for years, the resulting frenzy among collectors could drive prices into unimaginable territory, particularly if the doubling rivaled or exceeded famous examples like the 1955 double die or the 1969 double die. And in the speculative upper end of the market, condition plays an equally important role, because a flawless example graded at the highest levels by professional grading services, such as MS-69 or even the nearly mythical MS-70, could exponentially increase value when paired with a major error. And when you combine a dramatic double die with pristine preservation, you begin to understand how theoretical valuations can soar. But the story does not stop there. Because another error category often associated with the 1999 1-cent legend is the mule coin, a mule being a coin struck with mismatched dies that were never intended to be paired together, such as a penny obverse with a different denomination's reverse, or a memorial reverse paired with an obverse from a different year or design type. And while mules are exceedingly rare, especially in modern U.S. coinage, confirmed examples from other years have sold for extraordinary sums. And the mere possibility of an undiscovered 1999 penny mule ignites imaginations across the collecting community, especially considering the complexity of mint operations during that period. And then there is the realm of transitional errors, which are among the most valuable mistakes the mint can make. Transitional errors occur when old and new designs, compositions, or standards overlap during a changeover period, and although 1999 is not officially recognized as a major transition year for the cent, rumors and theories persist about experimental alloys, test strikes, or improperly mixed planchets that could have escaped into circulation, and if a 1999 penny were proven to be struck on an experimental composition never intended for public release, its historical importance alone could justify a staggering valuation, particularly if documentation or metallurgical analysis confirmed its uniqueness. And speaking of uniqueness, rarity is the ultimate multiplier in the coin market, because value is not just about how strange a coin is, but how many exist. And when collectors believe that only one or two examples of a particular error exist, competition becomes fierce, emotions run high, and prices can escalate rapidly, sometimes beyond rational expectations, driven by prestige, bragging rights, and the desire to own a once-in-a-lifetime artifact. And this is where the $17 million figure often enters the conversation, not necessarily as a recorded sale price, but as a hypothetical upper ceiling imagined by collectors and commentators when discussing what a perfect storm of rarity, error severity, condition, and demand could produce if the right coin surfaced at the right time, in the right auction, with the right story, and the right buyers competing against each other. And stories matter more than many people realize, because the narrative surrounding a coin can dramatically influence its appeal. A 1999 1 cent discovered by an ordinary person in circulation, authenticated after years of skepticism, and revealed to be a unique mint blunder would capture headlines far beyond numismatic circles, drawing attention from investors, museums, and the general public. And that kind of spotlight can push prices into uncharted territory, especially in an era where collectibles are increasingly viewed as alternative assets. Another factor often discussed is the possibility of a missing mint mark error or a misapplied mint mark. Although by 1999 mint marks were punched into dies rather than individual coins, making classic missing mint mark errors less likely, there is still room for anomalies such as over mint marks, repunched mint marks, or mint marks placed in unusual positions. And while these errors alone may not justify multi-million-dollar values, when combined with other anomalies they add layers of intrigue and complexity that collectors love. And we must also consider striking errors such as broad strikes, off-center strikes, multiple strikes, die caps, and partial collar errors, because while many of these are relatively common in minor forms, extreme examples that dramatically distort the coin while retaining identifiable details can become highly prized. And if such an extreme striking error occurred on a 1999 penny that also exhibited another rare characteristic, such as a double die or wrong planchet, the cumulative effect on value could be extraordinary. Then there are die state anomalies, including late-stage die breaks, massive cut errors, and shattered dies, where pieces of the die break away and leave raised, irregular blobs of metal on the coin. And while die breaks are known in many years, exceptionally large and dramatic examples that create almost sculptural effects on the coin surface can become famous in their own right, and collectors often pay significant premiums for the most visually striking specimens, especially when they come from years not typically associated with major errors. The 1999 penny also exists in the shadow of other famous modern cent errors, which paradoxically increases its potential appeal, because collectors who missed out on legendary pieces from earlier decades may turn their attention to later years in hopes of discovering the next great rarity, and this ongoing search keeps demand alive, driving speculation and enthusiasm. And in the age of the internet, rumors can spread quickly, sometimes inflating expectations, sometimes inspiring real discoveries, because people actually start checking their coins more carefully, and occasionally, against all odds, someone does find something extraordinary, and when that happens, the market reacts. Another element that feeds into the $17 million narrative is the role of professional grading and authentication, because without third-party verification even the most unusual coin will struggle to achieve maximum value. But once a coin is encapsulated by a respected grading service, assigned a grade. Next. 1996 D1 cent, today, because you are about to hear one of the most fascinating, mind-bending, and imagination-fueling stories in modern coin collecting, a story that turns an ordinary-looking penny into a potential $16 million treasure. And today our entire focus is on the 1996 D1 cent coin, A humble Lincoln cent minted in Denver during a year when billions of pennies flowed through the United States economy, yet within that ocean of ordinary copper-plated zinc coins lies the possibility of extraordinary errors, astonishing mistakes, and rare minting anomalies that could elevate a single example into the realm of legendary collectibles, the kind that are talked about for decades, argued over by experts, chased by collectors, and dreamed about by everyday people who suddenly realize that something small and overlooked might secretly hold life-changing value. And as we begin this journey, it is important to understand that coins are not valuable simply because they are old or shiny, but because they tell stories of human error, mechanical imperfection, historical context, and scarcity, and the 1996 D1 cent sits at a fascinating intersection of all these factors, because 1996 was a year of massive production pressure at the United States Mint, with the Denver Mint striking enormous quantities of Lincoln cents to meet demand. And whenever production numbers soar into the billions, the system is pushed closer to its limits, dies wear faster, planchets move quicker, inspections become more challenging, and the probability of rare but dramatic mistakes increases, and it is within those moments of strain that the seeds of multimillion-dollar errors are planted. One of the most powerful value-creating possibilities associated with the 1996 D1 cent is the existence of a true double die, obverse or reverse. Not the minor machine doubling that collectors often misinterpret, but a genuine hub double die created when the working die received more than one misaligned impression from the hub, resulting in strong, clear, and unmistakable doubling on design elements such as the date, the word liberty, or the motto "In God We Trust." And if such a double die from 1996 D were to exist in extremely low numbers, especially if it displayed dramatic separation comparable to famous double dies of the past, the numismatic world would take notice immediately, because double dies are among the most respected and sought-after error types, particularly when they come from modern issues where quality control was assumed to be advanced, and the shock value of discovering a major double die in a late 20th century penny would alone drive immense demand, but value escalates even further when condition enters the equation, because a sharply struck, well-preserved example graded at the highest mint state levels could exponentially increase desirability. And when collectors imagine a perfect storm of rarity, visual impact, and pristine condition, speculative valuations can climb into staggering territory. Another major category of errors that fuels the $16 million narrative surrounding the 1996 D1 cent is the possibility of a wrong planchet strike, where a penny is struck on a blank intended for another denomination or even a foreign coin, and such errors immediately stand out due to differences in weight, thickness, color, and sometimes even sound, and while wrong planchet errors are known, they are exceptionally rare in modern U.S. coinage, and the discovery of a confirmed 1996 D cent struck on an off-metal planchet would represent a serious breach in minting controls, instantly elevating the coin's importance, especially if metallurgical analysis revealed that the planchet was experimental, foreign, or otherwise undocumented. Because coins struck on unauthorized or experimental metals carry not just rarity but mystery, and mystery is a powerful driver of value, and if only one or two such examples were ever found, competition among elite collectors could become intense enough to push prices into eight-figure territory. Then there is the realm of mule errors, which are among the rarest and most dramatic mint mistakes imaginable, a mule being a coin struck with mismatched dies that were never intended to be paired together, such as a Lincoln cent obverse paired with a reverse from a different denomination or design type, and while confirmed U.S. mule coins are exceedingly rare, those that exist are legendary, and the mere possibility that a 1996 D1 cent mule could have slipped through the system fuels speculation and excitement, because such a coin would represent a fundamental breakdown in die management, and the uniqueness of such an error would almost guarantee astronomical value, especially if the pairing was unprecedented. Then there are transitional and experimental errors, which occur when old and new standards overlap or when test materials are accidentally introduced into production. And although 1996 is not officially recognized as a major transitional year for the cent, rumors persist within collecting circles about experimental alloys, test strikes, or improperly mixed planchets that could have been present during that era. And if a 1996 D cent were conclusively proven to be struck on an experimental composition never intended for circulation, its historical significance alone could justify an enormous valuation, because Collectors and institutions place immense value on artifacts that represent behind-the-scenes experimentation at the mint, and when documentation is scarce or non-existent, the coin itself becomes the primary evidence, adding to its mystique. Striking errors also play a crucial role in the story of potential multi-million-dollar value, because while minor off-center strikes and broad strikes are relatively common, extreme examples that dramatically distort the coin while retaining identifiable features can become highly desirable, especially when combined with other rare characteristics, such as a wrong planchet or double die, and a 1996 cent exhibiting an extreme multi-strike error, where the coin was struck multiple times in different orientations, could become a one-of-a-kind piece, particularly if the strikes reveal overlapping images of Lincoln or the memorial in ways never seen before. Die state errors add yet another layer of possibility, because as dies wear, crack, and eventually break, they can produce dramatic visual effects on coins, including large cut errors where chunks of the die break away and leave raised blobs of metal on the coin, and while die cracks are common, massive late-stage die breaks that create bold, sculptural features are far rarer, and collectors often pay substantial premiums for the most visually striking examples. Especially when they come from years not typically associated with famous errors, the 1996 cent also benefits from its position within modern numismatic mythology, because collectors are constantly searching for the next great discovery, the modern equivalent of legendary earlier errors, and this ongoing search keeps demand alive, and demand is the engine of value, and in the age of online communities, social media, and auction platforms, news of a major discovery spreads rapidly, drawing attention from around the world. And when attention converges on a single unique object, prices can escalate rapidly, sometimes beyond what traditional valuation models would predict. Another factor that cannot be ignored is the role of professional grading and authentication, because in the high-value segment of the market, third-party verification is essential, and once a coin is authenticated, graded, and attributed by a respected service, it gains legitimacy, confidence, and marketability. And in cases involving unprecedented errors, grading services may conduct extensive research, metallurgical testing, and internal review, further enhancing the coin's prestige. And prestige is a powerful force, because at the highest levels of collecting, buyers are not just acquiring metal, they are acquiring recognition, historical significance, and the status that comes with owning something truly extraordinary, and this is where the $16 million figure often enters the conversation, not necessarily as a documented sale price, but as a hypothetical valuation representing the upper limits of what a perfect storm of rarity, error severity, condition, provenance, and demand could produce. And while skepticism is healthy, history has shown that coins once thought impossible or imaginary have later been confirmed and sold for astonishing sums, and this fuels the belief that something equally extraordinary could exist within the 1996 cent population. It is also important to emphasize that the vast majority of 1996 pennies are worth only face value, and not every unusual-looking coin is a valuable error, but the possibility that a tiny fraction could be worth a fortune is what makes the hunt thrilling. Collectors are encouraged to look for unusual weights, incorrect colors, magnetic attraction, bold and clear doubling, extreme misalignment, or surfaces that differ fundamentally from normal copper-plated zinc cents, and patience and education are key, because true rarities often require careful examination and sometimes professional evaluation to confirm, and while many claims will be disproven, it only takes one genuine discovery to justify the search. And beyond monetary value, these coins represent something deeper. They are physical reminders that even in highly controlled modern systems, imperfection exists, that human and mechanical processes are fallible. Next, 1983 1 cent. Today we are diving into one of the most fascinating and talked about stories in modern coin collecting, the story of the 1983 1 cent coin that, under extraordinary circumstances, is believed by collectors and experts to have the potential to reach a staggering value of up to $15 million. A value that seems impossible when you remember that this coin was meant to be nothing more than pocket change, yet it is precisely this contrast between the ordinary and the extraordinary that makes the 1983 penny so legendary, so captivating, and so endlessly discussed. And as we begin this deep exploration, it is important to understand that 1983 is not just another random year for the Lincoln cent, it is one of the most critical years in the entire modern history of the penny, a year defined by transition, confusion, experimentation, and high-pressure mint production, all of which created the perfect environment for rare and spectacular errors, because 1983 was the first full year in which the United States Mint officially transitioned the 1-cent coin from the traditional bronze composition of 95% copper to a new copper-plated zinc core, a change driven by rising copper prices and economic necessity. And while the transition was officially completed in 1982, the reality inside the mint was far more complex, with leftover bronze planchets, experimental blanks, test strikes, and human oversight all interacting in ways that were never meant to reach the public. And this is where the legend of the ultra-valuable 1983 1-cent truly begins, because one of the most famous and powerful error possibilities associated with this year is the existence of a 1983 penny struck on a leftover bronze planchet, a coin that technically should not exist at all, since all regular issue 1983 cents were supposed to be copper-plated zinc. And yet history has already proven that such coins do exist, with a small number of authenticated 1983 bronze cents having surfaced, each weighing approximately 3.11 grams instead of the standard 2.5 grams, and these coins are not just rare, they are violations of mint policy frozen in metal, physical proof that the transition was not as clean or controlled as official records would suggest. And when a coin exists that directly contradicts what the mint claims should be possible, collectors take notice, museums take notice, and value skyrockets, because rarity alone is powerful, but rarity combined with impossibility is explosive. And while known examples of 1983 bronze cents have sold for very high six-figure prices, the theoretical $15 million valuation enters the discussion when collectors imagine the discovery of a unique or near-perfect specimen, perhaps one struck from an experimental alloy, or one preserved in flawless mint state condition, or even one tied to documented internal mint testing, because provenance and condition can elevate an already rare coin into an entirely different category of value. Another critical error that fuels the incredible value narrative of the 1983 penny is the famous double die reverse, a dramatic and widely recognized mint error where the reverse design shows strong doubling, particularly noticeable in the memorial building details, the columns, the lettering, and the overall structure. And this double die reverse is especially fascinating because it represents a design mismatch, with the reverse resembling what would later become the standard design in 1984, suggesting that dies were prepared or hubbed incorrectly. And this type of error is deeply important to collectors because it offers insight into die preparation practices and design transitions at the mint. And when such an error appears in a year already associated with major composition changes, its significance multiplies. And while many double die reverses are known, the value explodes when the doubling is bold, clearly separated, and found on a coin in exceptional condition, because clarity and eye appeal are critical drivers of demand, and demand is what transforms rarity into massive monetary value. Then there are striking errors that add yet another layer of possibility to the 1983 1-cent story, including off-center strikes, broad strikes, multiple strikes, and partial collar errors. And while minor versions of these errors are relatively common, extreme examples that dramatically distort the coin while preserving identifiable design elements are far rarer and far more valuable, especially when they occur on a coin already linked to historic transitions, because collectors are not just buying an error, they are buying a moment in time when systems failed under pressure, and pressure was certainly present in 1983, as the mint worked to adjust machinery, materials, and procedures to accommodate the new zinc-based planchets. Another powerful factor is the possibility of wrong planchet errors beyond bronze, such as pennies struck on planchets intended for other denominations or even foreign coins. And while such errors are extremely rare, they are among the most visually striking and immediately verifiable mistakes, because weight, thickness, color, and composition all betray the error, and a confirmed 1983 cent struck on an unauthorized planchet would represent a major minting failure, instantly elevating the coin's status and desirability. And if such a coin were unique or tied to experimental materials, its value could theoretically climb into the multi-million-dollar range, especially if two or more elite collectors competed for ownership, because at the highest levels of numismatics, competition and prestige can drive prices far beyond traditional expectations. Die state errors also contribute to the extraordinary value potential of the 1983 penny, because as dies wear, crack, and fail, they can produce dramatic visual anomalies such as large cud breaks, retained die fragments, and shattered die effects. And while small die cracks are common, massive late-stage failures that dramatically alter the appearance of the coin are far rarer, and when such an error appears on a historically important year like 1983, collectors view it as a convergence of significance and spectacle. Then there is the role of professional authentication and grading, which cannot be overstated, because in the world of high-value coins, legitimacy is everything, and a coin that is authenticated, attributed, and encapsulated by a respected grading service gains instant credibility, market confidence, and visibility, and in the case of unprecedented or controversial errors, grading services may perform extensive metallurgical analysis, archival research, and internal review, adding layers of documentation and prestige that further increase value. And this is where the $15 million figure often comes into conversation, not necessarily as a recorded sale, but as a speculative upper limit, a representation of what could happen if a truly unique, historically important, perfectly preserved 1983 error cent were to appear at a major auction, backed by ironclad authentication and surrounded by intense media attention, because attention fuels desire, and desire fuels price. Especially in an era where rare coins are increasingly viewed as alternative investments and cultural artifacts rather than mere collectibles, it is also important to acknowledge that the vast majority of 1983 pennies are worth only face value, and that many claims of extraordinary errors are ultimately disproven, but history shows that it only takes one genuine discovery to justify decades of searching, and beyond money, these coins capture the imagination because they remind us that even in highly controlled systems, mistakes happen, and sometimes those mistakes create objects of incredible beauty, mystery, and value, and whether or not a single 1983 1 cent ever officially sells for $15 million, the story itself continues to inspire collectors around the world to look more closely at the ordinary, to question assumptions, and to appreciate the hidden complexity behind everyday objects. And as you go through your change, sort old jars, or examine inherited collections, remember that one of the greatest treasures in modern numismatics came from a year of transition, confusion, and human imperfection, and that sometimes history hides in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to notice that a simple penny might not be simple at all, and might just carry a story worth millions. Last 2010 D 1 cent. Today we are diving deep into one of the most surprising and fascinating modern coin mysteries, the story of the 2010 D 1 cent coin that under extraordinary circumstances has captured attention with claims, theories, and possibilities suggesting it could be worth up to $14 million. A number that sounds almost unreal when you consider that this coin is barely more than a decade old and was minted in massive quantities, yet this is exactly what makes the story so compelling, because modern coins are supposed to be perfect, predictable, and tightly controlled, and when something goes wrong in such an environment, the rarity and shock value of that mistake can elevate a simple penny into legendary status. And as we begin this exploration, it is important to understand that coin value is not dictated by age alone, but by rarity, error severity, historical context, demand, and the story a coin tells about the moment it was created. And the 2010 D Lincoln cent tells a story rooted in transition, pressure, technological complexity, and the simple truth that no system created by humans is immune to error. 2010 was a significant year for the Lincoln cent because it followed the introduction of the Lincoln bicentennial reverse designs in 2009, which had dramatically altered minting processes, tooling, and production schedules. And in 2010 the Mint introduced the Union Shield reverse, a completely new design that required fresh dies, new hubs, and recalibrated striking procedures. And whenever a new design is introduced, especially following an already complex prior year like 2009, the risk of mistakes increases, because workers, machines, and quality control systems are adapting simultaneously, and it is within this environment that the seeds of rare and valuable errors can be planted. One of the most powerful possibilities associated with the 2010 D 1 cent is the existence of extreme double die errors, particularly double die Obverse coins where the date, the word liberty, or the motto "In God We Trust" show bold, clearly separated doubling caused by misalignment during the die hubbing process, and unlike machine doubling, which is flat and shelf-like, true double dies show rounded, raised duplication that is part of the design itself, and if a dramatic double die from 2010D were to exist in extremely limited numbers, especially one that went unnoticed during initial circulation, the shock to the numismatic community would be immediate, because double dies of this magnitude are expected in earlier eras, not in the age of modern computerized die production, and that improbability alone would drive intense demand. Then there is the potential of double die reverse errors on the Union Shield design, which is itself symbolic of unity and strength, and bold doubling in the lettering, shield lines, or banner details would not only be visually striking but historically meaningful, because it would represent a fundamental failure during the launch of a brand new design, and collectors place tremendous value on errors tied to first-year issues, especially when those errors reveal something about the minting process that official narratives do not openly discuss. Another extraordinary category of error that fuels the $14 million discussion is the possibility of wrong planchet strikes, where a 2010 cent is struck on a blank intended for another denomination, a foreign coin, or even an experimental alloy, and such errors immediately stand out because of differences in weight, thickness, color, and sometimes magnetic properties, and while wrong planchet errors are known, they are exceedingly rare in modern U.S. coinage, and a confirmed 2010 penny struck on an unauthorized planchet would represent a serious breach in mint controls, instantly elevating the coin into elite status, especially if metallurgical analysis confirmed that the planchet was never meant for circulation, because coins struck on experimental or undocumented materials carry immense historical intrigue, and intrigue is a powerful multiplier of value. Another deeply fascinating possibility is the existence of transitional composition errors, because while the basic copper-plated zinc composition of the cent remained unchanged in 2010, the mint has historically tested alternative materials during periods of rising metal costs, and if experimental blanks were present within mint facilities, even briefly, the accidental striking of a cent on such a blank would create a coin of immense importance, because it would represent a physical artifact of behind-the-scenes experimentation, something collectors and institutions fiercely desire, and if such a coin were unique or tied to internal documentation, its value could climb rapidly into multi-million-dollar territory. Striking errors also play a significant role in the valuation theory surrounding the 2010 cent, including extreme off-center strikes where large portions of the design are missing yet key details remain visible, multi-strike errors where the coin is struck multiple times in different orientations, and broad strikes where the collar fails and the coin expands outward dramatically, and while minor examples of these errors are not uncommon, extreme and visually dramatic specimens are far rarer, especially when they occur on coins from a year associated with a major design change, because collectors see them as snapshots of chaos during a moment of transition. Die state errors add yet another layer of possibility, because as dies wear, crack, and sometimes shatter under pressure, they can create raised lines, breaks, and large cut formations on coins, and while small die cracks are common, massive late-stage failures that create bold, sculptural features are far less so, and a 2010 cent exhibiting a dramatic cut or shattered die effect on the new Union Shield design would be immediately recognizable and highly sought after, especially if the error altered the symbolism or readability of the design in a striking way. Then there is the extremely rare and exciting category of mule errors, where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a cent obverse with a reverse from a different denomination or design type, and while confirmed mule coins from the modern era are extraordinarily rare, those that do exist are legendary, and the discovery of a 2010 cent mule would represent a breakdown in die management systems that were believed to be nearly foolproof, and that kind of failure would fascinate collectors, historians, and the general public alike, driving intense competition for ownership, and competition is one of the strongest forces in pushing prices beyond traditional expectations. Another crucial factor in the $14 million narrative is condition, because in modern coinage, high-grade preservation is expected, but when combined with extreme rarity and error severity, condition becomes a massive value amplifier. a flawless or near-flawless error coin graded at the highest mint state levels could command exponentially higher prices than a circulated example, because top-tier collectors often seek the absolute best available specimen, regardless of cost, and this is where professional grading and authentication become essential. Because without third-party verification, even the most spectacular error will struggle to achieve maximum value. But once a coin is authenticated, graded, and attributed by a respected grading service, it gains legitimacy, market confidence, and global visibility, and in cases involving unprecedented errors, grading services may conduct extensive metallurgical testing and internal research, further enhancing the coin's prestige, and prestige plays a massive role at the highest levels of collecting, because buyers are not just purchasing metal, they are purchasing recognition, status, and a tangible piece of history, and this is why the $14 million figure continues to appear in discussions about the ultimate potential value of a 2010 error cent, not as a guaranteed price, but as a hypothetical upper limit representing what could happen if a perfect storm of rarity, uniqueness, condition, provenance, and demand were to converge. It is also important to acknowledge the role of media, online communities, and modern communication in amplifying value, because today news of a major discovery can spread globally in hours, drawing attention from collectors, investors, and institutions worldwide, and that attention can ignite bidding wars that push prices far beyond what traditional valuation models would predict, especially when the object in question is a small, relatable item like a penny, which captures public imagination in a way few other collectibles can. And while skepticism is healthy, history has repeatedly shown that coins once thought impossible have later been confirmed and sold for astonishing sums, reinforcing the belief that modern rarities are still out there waiting to be found. It must be emphasized that the vast majority of 2010 pennies are worth exactly 1 cent, and that many unusual-looking coins are the result of damage rather than mint error, but the possibility that a tiny fraction could be worth a fortune is what fuels the search, encourages education, and keeps collectors examining their coins carefully, and beyond monetary value. These coins matter because they reveal the human side of industrial systems, the moments when machines falter, procedures fail, and something unintended slips through, creating an object that tells a story no official report ever could. And whether or not a single 2010 1 cent ever officially sells for $14 million